Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in life when fear rises without warning, not the obvious kind, but a deeper unease that appears just as change begins to call. It shows up when something within you is ready to shift, yet the mind hesitates to let go of what is familiar. Today, we explore why fear often stands at the threshold of change, not as an enemy, but as a signal that transformation is near, and that something important within you is asking to be faced. Feeling lost is often described as a lack of direction, a sense that life has somehow drifted off course. Yet this feeling rarely comes from the absence of options or opportunities. More often, it emerges when the mind encounters a threshold it does not yet have the courage to cross. What is labeled as confusion is, in many cases, fear that has learned how to speak in a quieter, more acceptable voice. Instead of announcing itself openly, fear disguises itself as uncertainty, hesitation, or the belief that one must wait for greater clarity before taking action. The human psyche is designed to protect itself. When it senses potential danger, emotional, psychological, or social, it activates defenses meant to preserve stability. Growth, however, threatens that stability. To change direction is to challenge familiar patterns, and familiar patterns, even when painful, offer predictability. Feeling lost becomes a way to remain still without admitting fear. It allows a person to say, "I don't know where to go," rather than, "I'm afraid of what will happen if I move." This disguised fear often appears during periods of transition. A person may feel restless, dissatisfied, or internally divided, yet unable to name a clear reason why. The outer circumstances may not be disastrous, but the inner experience feels unresolved. This tension is not confusion. It is an internal conflict between the part that seeks safety and the part that longs for expansion. When fear dominates, the mind translates that conflict into a narrative of being lost. Another reason fear hides behind the feeling of being lost is responsibility. To choose a direction is to accept the consequences of that choice. As long as someone believes they are lost, responsibility can be postponed. There is comfort in not deciding because decision demands ownership. Fear resists this ownership by encouraging endless reflection, research, and self-analysis. These behaviors feel productive, but they often function as sophisticated forms of avoidance. Feeling lost can also protect identity. Every step forward threatens an older version of the self, one built around habits, roles, and expectations. Letting go of that identity can feel like a kind of psychological loss. Fear arises not because the new path is wrong, but because it requires the death of what is familiar. The mind reacts by creating doubt, convincing the individual that they must first find themselves before they can act, when in reality, the self is formed through action. This fear-driven confusion is reinforced by comparison. Observing others who appear confident and certain can intensify the sense of being lost. Yet what is often unseen is that clarity in others was not discovered in advance. It was built through repeated attempts, mistakes, and adjustments. Fear distorts perception, making movement seem reckless and stillness seem wise. Over time, stillness hardens into stagnation, and stagnation deepens the belief of being lost. There is also the fear of failure hiding beneath this feeling. Beginning something meaningful exposes limitations, flaws, and weaknesses. Remaining lost feels safer than risking proof of inadequacy. The mind prefers the discomfort of uncertainty over the vulnerability of effort. This is why people can remain stuck for years, convinced they lack direction, while actually lacking permission to fail. Ironically, the longer fear remains unrecognized, the more convincing the feeling of being lost becomes. The mind gathers evidence to support it, replaying past mistakes and missed opportunities. Yet these memories do not point to incapability, they point to unattempted growth. Fear reshapes memory and imagination alike, turning potential into threat and movement into danger. When examined closely, feeling lost is not an empty state, but a crowded one, filled with unspoken fears, postponed decisions, and unexpressed desires. It signals not the absence of meaning, but its proximity. The discomfort arises because something within is ready to move, while another part resists the risk of movement. This inner tension creates the illusion of being lost, when in truth, it marks a moment of readiness. Understanding this changes the relationship with the feeling entirely. Instead of treating it as a flaw or failure, it can be seen as an invitation to confront what has been avoided. Beneath the confusion lies a simple question the mind hesitates to ask. What would I do if I were not afraid? Fear appears most vividly at moments when the inner structure of a person is about to change. It does not arrive randomly, nor does it signal that something is wrong. It emerges precisely when the familiar way of being can no longer contain what is trying to develop. At the edge of transformation, fear acts like a psychological boundary, marking the point where the known self ends and the unknown self begins. The mind senses this shift long before it can explain it, and fear becomes the first language through which that awareness is expressed. Transformation threatens continuity. The psyche, shaped by habit and repetition, relies on patterns to maintain stability. Even when those patterns create dissatisfaction, they offer predictability. Change disrupts this order. Fear arises not because the future is dangerous, but because it is undefined. The mind struggles with what it cannot control or predict, and transformation demands surrender to uncertainty. At that threshold, fear intensifies, attempting to pull the individual back into familiar territory. This fear is often misinterpreted as a warning to stop. In reality, it is evidence that something meaningful is unfolding. When life remains stagnant, fear remains quiet. It grows loud only when movement becomes necessary. The closer one comes to acting in alignment with deeper impulses, the stronger the resistance feels. This resistance is not opposition from the outside, but tension within the self, where old structures clash with emerging ones. At the edge of transformation, identity becomes unstable. The roles, beliefs, and narratives that once defined a person begin to loosen their grip. This instability can feel like disorientation, even panic. Fear rushes in to restore order, urging a return to what once felt secure. It questions competence, readiness, and worth. These doubts are not objective assessments. They are defenses designed to preserve the existing identity from dissolution. There is also fear of responsibility woven into transformation. To evolve is to accept a wider range of consequences. Growth expands awareness, and awareness removes innocence. Once a new possibility is seen, it cannot be unseen. Fear arises to protect against this irreversible shift. Remaining unchanged keeps life smaller but simpler. Transformation enlarges life, and with that expansion comes accountability. Fear also intensifies because transformation exposes vulnerability. To change is to risk failure, judgment, and self-disappointment. The protective layers built over time, rationalizations, routines, emotional distance, begin to crack. The psyche senses exposure and reacts defensively. Fear becomes a signal to reinforce those layers, even when they are the very barriers preventing growth. Another dimension of this fear lies in separation. Transformation often requires distancing from familiar environments, relationships, or expectations. Even internal growth can create a sense of isolation, as the inner world no longer aligns with the outer one. Fear arises from the possibility of standing alone without the validation of past structures. The mind resists this isolation, equating belonging with safety even when belonging requires self-betrayal. At this threshold, time itself feels distorted. The future seems heavy with consequences, while the past appears comforting by comparison. Fear amplifies memories of past mistakes and projects them forward as predictions. It creates the illusion that staying the same avoids pain, ignoring the quiet cost of stagnation. Transformation threatens this illusion by revealing that remaining unchanged carries its own form of loss. Fear at the edge of transformation is not an enemy to be eliminated, but a force to be understood. It signals that the psyche is reorganizing itself, that old internal structures are being challenged by new potential. The intensity of fear often matches the significance of the change that is trying to occur. Small adjustments provoke little resistance. Profound shifts awaken deep fear. When fear is recognized in this way, its presence no longer means retreat. It becomes a marker of importance rather than danger. The edge of transformation is not comfortable, because comfort belongs to what is already known. Fear stands at this edge, not to block the path, but to announce that crossing it will alter the self in lasting ways. Fear does not appear to stop transformation, it appears to announce it. When you encounter fear at the edge of change, you are not failing. You are standing at a critical moment of inner reorganization. What feels like resistance is often the final test before growth. If you learn to recognize fear not as a warning, but as a marker of importance, you begin to move forward with awareness rather than retreat. And in that awareness, transformation quietly takes root.